everybody? Zach Couples, physical therapist here, and folks, we are about to go into one of the most incredible, outstanding, and my personal favorite overhead press variations, the oblique sit press. Folks, it's one of my favorite starting points for anyone who wants to get into overhead pressing variation because it eliminates a lot of the common errors or problems that we might see when we're starting to teach someone an overhead press, especially if it's one that's with both arms or bilateral. In this video, you're gonna get the who, what, where, when, and why with this awesome move. So let's go ahead, we're gonna get into it, and I hope that you give it a shot. Let's go into each of the components needed to perform this particular movement like a boss. Now, the most important piece is not actually even the pressing point, but the setup, because your setup with the support arm really sets the stage for getting the lower rib cage in a good position, which will help promote the types of movements you're trying to drive at the arm and the neck. So let's go into that first. Big keys with this. First, you want to make sure that if you look at me from the side, my hand is roughly in line with my hips, just like so. And when I'm doing this particular move, what you want to do is you want to push through the pisiform, which is this wiggly bone that's on the outside of your hand. But notice folks, like if you zoom in on me, I'm not lifting my hand up like this. My hand is flat, but I'm pushing through that bone. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna engage the abs a little bit, so then I can set up for the breathing sequence needed to get good lower rib cage position. So I'm gonna push like this, and I want my hand, elbow, shoulder, all centered with my trunk, just like so. So there's my setup with the reach. A ton of people will screw that part up. And the biggest screw up that you're gonna see with the support arm is you're gonna have someone dump forward like this. They're gonna get their arm into a bunch of humeral or shoulder extension. They'll be too far back, which is gonna, guess what, folks, drive the humerus into extension. And now, I don't really have any leverage to push from with the pisiform when I'm in this situation. The other issue is if I have my arm in some crazy extension like this, well, now I'm gonna do some funky stuff with the rib cage that's gonna limit the rotation that I'm gonna be driving with the oblique sit press. For example, if I dip my shoulder forward and I keep going, you can see that I start to slouch. Well, guess what, folks? If I slouch, my overhead capabilities are kind of lackluster. The other thing that could happen is if my arm's like this, well, I don't really have much leverage to reach from, so someone might also arch their back like this to try to get positioning. That's also not going to allow me to get full overhead, because what I end up doing is I end up tipping backwards, so I make my vertical-ish press more horizontal. We don't want that. So it's super duper important to make sure you get set up with the hand in line with the hips, arm in a straight line. Generally, when I'm coaching people to do this, I just put them in position. I say, hey, I want your hand here, boom, just like that. That's probably the most important piece to this. So make sure you have a good setup like that. Now, one other thing you could do if someone is still having a hard time getting into that position is you can actually, and especially if it's like a little uncomfortable to press, what I sometimes will do is I'll have them take a longer stance out like this, so that way the press becomes less vertical. But I'm still gonna get that reach through the pisiform here when I do the press. So the difference would be I'm here, there, versus if I bring it in a little bit more, now it's becoming closer to a vertical press. So this is harder, this is easier. And folks, if you are still struggling, maybe you got someone who gets a ton of elbow hyperextension as well and you don't like it, you can make it super duper easier, but it's also difficult by getting in like an oblique sit side plank position and then pressing from there. So those are really the options with that. Make sure that the support arm is centered with the hip. Play with how far you want to be from your hip. And if all else fails, go down to forearm, make sure you get the reach. Once you've gotten position with the support arm, What you want to do next is you want to get an exhale. What the exhale is going to do is it's going to help further support lower rib cage positioning that will allow me to complete the press. It's almost like setting the foundation for you to press like a boss. So what I want to do here is I'm going to get in my same setup, I'm going to reach through the pisiform and I'm going to let out a nice full exhale. If you get it right, coupled with the reach, you're going to feel an increase in ab engagement on the downside, just like that. Now, people will screw this up one of two ways. One, they'll get too excessive with the exhale and they'll end up crunching, like that. Well, folks, then I run into the same issue. Now I'm not going to be able to press overhead all the way. The other issue is the exhale's going to be a little too lackadaisical, a little too chill. Well, if I just do like a little, that's not going to be enough abdominal activity to get the lower rib cage to come down. Not that you're forcing that, but you want the exhale to drive that. But to help get the lower rib cage come down into a position. So then, what I do then is when I inhale on the next breath, I have all this space on my right side to be able to press overhead without problems. So make sure your exhale ain't stale. Now, folks, you got a good support arm. Your exhale is amazing. Now we can work on the pressing action. With the pressing action, what you want to do is you're going to get your setup, of course, exhale. And I keep the arm kind of close, almost like I'm setting up with a rack position, whether you're doing a 2 kettlebell front squat or most kettlebell activities. And then from here, I'm going to make sure the knuckles point to the ceiling. I'm going to check out the bell and say, hey, bell, how you doing? I'm going to keep my eyes on the bell. What that turn does towards that side is it helps open or it helps rotate the spine towards the side that's pressing, in this case the right. That's useful to create space to be able to press overhead without issues. It's one of the reasons why if someone ever gets pinching or it's uncomfortable to press overhead when you're doing something that's a little bit more outward like this, which has more internal rotation. One reason why this one will oftentimes be more comfortable is because the turn itself is creating more external rotation space, which helps increase range of motion on the top of the shoulder, so you minimize the pinching that can sometimes happen with an overhead press. And so because I want to bias it towards more external rotation, I'm going to look, and then I'm going to keep my arm in like a relatively neutral position as I press. Meaning, I'm not going to do like your typical letter J that you might do with most kettlebell presses. I'm going to turn, and I'm going to press straight up, more so near the sagittal plane. So I'm here, eyes on the bell, keep them on the bell as you exhale, or as you press. Just like that. And you go as far as you can, maintaining the support arm. You get it right, you're going to feel your deltoid going pretty good. And those are some of the big keys with the pressing portion. Now, folks, people will inevitably screw that part up as well. Most of the screw up will be utilizing more of a letter J press as opposed to going straight up. The reason why I don't do the letter J is because when I go out like this in this particular press, well, now what I've done is I've abducted, externally rotated, and then when I press from this position, it's more of an internal rotation action that's going on, because you can just see at this point when I go overhead, see how my arm is internally rotated at the top versus here where it's not. Now it's in a more externally rotated position. Well, my goal with this particular press, folks, is I want to try to make it a little bit more of an external rotation bias. So basically we're going to create more space to go overhead. So then when we go to the press that has more of an internal rotation bias, it's more comfortable. So I want to try to keep it so I can use this press to bias external rotation. I'm going to do that better by keeping it in to where it's almost pure flexion as opposed to that J press. The other thing that sometimes can be problematic with the J press is it allows you to use more weight. With this particular exercise, you're not going to be doing heavy triples with it. It's more of a 8 to 12 rep range type of activity. But if I letter J and the weight gets pretty heavy, now what I have the tendency to do is I might fall like this because I might end up arching or changing my thorax position to try to get the weight overhead, which I don't want. So you want to get your push, exhale, keep it in close, eyes on the bell, and press up just like that. And those are the big keys to performing the oblique sit press like a boss. If we want to get the most out of the oblique sit press and know when to best apply this activity, we got to look at the biomechanics. The first area in question that we're going to look at that's influenced heavily by this activity is the rib cage. And folks, the support arm is what does it all. When you look at the support arm on the oblique sit press, you'll notice that I'm pushing myself away from the ground through that arm. And then we have to look at what that does to the rib cage. If, let's say, I use my right arm to complete the press, and so I'm going to take my little rib cage model right here, tip it sideways, and when I perform that press, what will happen is you'll see the rib cage kind of close down on the side that's closest to the ground, in this case the right. And then what happens, and you can see when I do this, when I close this side down, it causes the left side to open up. And if we look at, okay, well, what action is occurring when I close down one side of the rib cage and I open up the other? Well, folks, these are actions that happen with any type of side bending activity, any type of rotational activity that we do. And most importantly, both of these actions occur when I take a breath of air in and a breath of air out. So we can see that the push away and the alteration in rib cage shape and positioning can influence a wide variety of movements. To create a classification system for this movement, because we don't really talk about the lower rib cage that often, unless you've been following your boy for a while, with the support side rib cage, so in this case it's going to be the right arm pushing, I'm going to close or have an exhaled position of the right lower rib cage. So what's going on there is you're going to see the lower rib cage come down and in. We call this the bucket handle action of the rib cage, and it's the exhalation portion. So I have a closure on that side. And then on the left side, because that's going to be pushed open, that's an inhaled lower rib cage, or it's expanded out, and you'll see it move outward and upward. And so when you think about application process of this move, if I have someone who can't really get that bucket handle action occurring either on the inhalation or the exhalation piece, it's a really good activity to incorporate for them because it gets them both. If you're someone who's into rib cage structure and we want to talk about infrasternal angle presentation, either someone who has a narrower rib cage or a narrow infrasternal angle or a wider rib cage, a wide infrasternal angle, could benefit from this because it addresses both ends of the breathing spectrum. And that has influences across many different activities and movements. Not only that, folks, but if your lower rib cage position is lackluster, it's going to limit the range of motion capabilities that you'll have in the arm and the upper thorax. Because if I can't keep a good lower rib cage position, you're going to see a lot of the compensations that we talk about, namely like arching the back, throwing the rib cage forward, and limiting your ability to go overhead. It has to be anchored at the lower rib cage first. The next piece we're going to look at is how the leg position influences what the starting position is through the spine. Assuming that right arm is supporting, you'll notice that both legs are in external rotation, but one of them is a little bit more ahead of the other. And in this case, it would be the left leg. And so if the left leg is a little bit more ahead of the right, we can see that the pelvis is actually going to be more right facing in this situation. If the pelvis is right facing, we can also say the entire axial skeleton. The spine is also going to be facing to the right. So my starting position is actually, in this case, a right-oriented or right-rotated spine. So we got a right-oriented spine. We got a closed right lower rib cage. We got an opened up left lower rib cage. What's going to happen with the reach? Well, I'm glad you asked. When I keep the weight in close and I reach up overhead and I start to turn my head to the left, what will happen to the axial skeleton is I'm going to have this rightwardly oriented spine begin to turn towards the weight that's pressing. That's why I keep it in close and I do the head turn, because when I turn my head left in this case of the press, the spine has to begin turning to the left. And then as I press the weight higher up overhead, assuming that I'm keeping it in close and I'm maintaining the leftward head turn, the more left rotation I'm going to drive. And the reason why I want to rotate towards the left side in this case has to do with the ribcage positioning, because the left ribcage in this case is going to be more opened up, expanded. There's going to be more space available. So I want to try to turn into that space. And those are the big biomechanical occurrences happening with the oblique sit press. You have a spinal orientation that's towards the support arm. You have a lower rib cage that's closed on the support side. It's more opened up on the pressing side. And then when you perform the press, when you keep it in tight and you turn your head, you're going to be turning away from the initial spinal orientation. And so what this is it's a very early rotational action that occurs in the range. It's not an end range position. And that's one reason why it's a really good starting point for a lot of individuals when you're incorporating an overhead press, because it's not at an end range rotational action. Just like I can extend my elbow from a flexed position, I can rotate my spine in the opposing direction from a very ipsilateral rotated position. Meaning, if the spine in this case that we've been talking about is rotated as far as I can to the right, I can create a little bit of rotation towards the left and get some nice benefits from that. So then fam, you now might have a sneaking suspicion of who to program this for. If I have someone who has a loss of lower ribcage dynamics and I want to drive rotation of any kind, this would be an awesome move. In particular, with the side that I'm pressing on. When I rotate towards that side, I'm going to increase expansion or range of motion on the posterior aspect of that person, because when I rotate, in this case towards the left, because we've been using that as our reference point, I have to have posterior expansion occurring throughout the rib cage. And so if you see someone who's got a loss of, let's say, shoulder flexion, shoulder external rotation, or cervical rotation towards that side, those are the three telltale signs that will tell me, I probably want to incorporate the oblique sit press. So if we utilize this particular version where I got the right arm supporting and I'm pressing with the left, you're going to see someone have a loss of left shoulder flexion, left shoulder external rotation, and left cervical rotation. There you have it, folks. Now you got just about everything you need to know when utilizing the oblique sit press in your programming. How do you like this move? Are there some areas that you've been struggling with? Are there other exercises that you're like, I need some help on that and I'm not sure what I should do? Leave a comment below, and while you're there, please like and subscribe the video. It helps the fam keep growing. Otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in. You've been an incredible, outstanding audience, and I hope that you keep real, but not to the extent where things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving, and I'll see you next time. Deuces.